The most painful thing is not being hated. It is being treated like your presence does not change the room. Nathan Cole felt that kind of invisibility before anyone said a word. He walked into the conference room with his notes prepared, his ideas organized, his mind already rehearsing how to sound useful, sharp, and easy to respect. But Grant Miller barely looked up. He glanced at Nathan once, then turned back to the others as if Nathan had entered without weight. No insult, no confrontation, just a quiet dismissal, the kind that makes a person question whether they matter before they even sit down. And that is where the hidden rule begins. People often decide whether to ignore you long before they hear your argument. They read your pace, your posture, your need for approval, your fear of being misunderstood. Nathan did not realize he was speaking before he spoke. His quick smile spoke. His cautious movement spoke. The way he looked around the room to see who noticed him spoke. Grant heard all of it, not with his ears, but with instinct. He sensed that Nathan wanted to be accepted, and people who want to be accepted too badly often become easy to overlook. You may know this feeling. You share an idea at work, and the room moves past it until someone louder repeats the same thing. You try to explain yourself in a relationship, but the other person gives you just enough silence to make you shrink. You sit with family, grown and capable, yet one dismissive tone pulls you back into the version of yourself that always had to prove something. This is not random. Human beings respond to weight. Not physical weight, but psychological weight. The kind that comes from someone who does not rush, does not chase attention, does not collapse when ignored. Nathan had intelligence. He had effort. He had good intentions. But he lacked weight. And in rooms where status is silently measured, that weakness becomes visible. Grant was not a monster. He was simply the type of man who noticed who could be interrupted, who could be moved, who would work harder for recognition after being denied it. And Nathan kept showing him. A nervous laugh when Grant cut him off. An extra explanation when no one asked for one. A softer tone after his point was ignored. Nathan thought he was being professional, but the room was learning something else. This is a man who can be passed over without consequence. That is the dangerous part. People do not always ignore you because they hate you. Sometimes they ignore you because you have trained them to believe your presence will remain available even when it is not respected. The first hidden rule is brutal. If you treat your own presence like something optional, others will treat it the same way. Nathan did not understand that yet. He thought the problem was Grant's coldness, the room's indifference, the unfairness of being overlooked. But underneath all of it was a deeper wound. Nathan was still asking the room to tell him he had value. And the moment you ask the room for permission to matter, someone will eventually use that hunger to make you disappear. The strange thing about being ignored is that it rarely feels like a decision made against you. It feels like something you failed to prevent. Nathan sat through the rest of that meeting watching the pattern repeat itself in small, quiet ways. Grant would lean toward someone else when they spoke. He would nod at a weaker version of Nathan's idea when it came from a louder voice. He would let Nathan finish a sentence, then move on without touching it, as if the words had never entered the room. And each time it happened, Nathan felt the same old instinct rise inside him. Say more, prove more, become more useful, make them see you. That instinct is the trap. Because the moment you start chasing attention, you are no longer leading your presence. You are begging the room to return it to you. This happens everywhere. In an office, someone interrupts you in a meeting, and instead of calmly reclaiming the point, you smile and let it disappear. In a relationship, someone gives you cold distance, and you become warmer, longer, more available, hoping your effort will pull them back. In a family, one sharp comment from a parent can turn a grown adult into a child again, explaining choices that no longer require permission. In a group of friends, someone talks over you twice, and you laugh along because challenging the pattern feels too heavy. But here is the hidden game most people miss. Others are not only listening to what you say, they are watching what you allow. They are learning the price of access to you. They are learning whether your boundaries have consequences or only explanations. Nathan had spent years thinking kindness meant staying easy to deal with. He thought maturity meant not making things awkward. He thought professionalism meant absorbing small disrespect so the room could stay comfortable. But comfort is not the same as respect. Sometimes the peace you protect is the same peace that makes you invisible. Grant understood this in a practical way. He was not sitting there plotting like a villain. He had simply learned that social rooms reward people who hold frame and quietly punish people who need to be included. When Nathan tried too hard, Grant gave him less attention. When Nathan softened his point, Grant treated it like something unfinished. When Nathan looked around for approval, the room sensed that his authority was still waiting outside himself. That is why being ignored can become a cycle. You feel unseen, so you perform harder. You perform harder, so people feel your need. They feel your need, so your presence loses weight. Then you try even harder, and the cycle tightens. Nathan was beginning to see that his problem was not a lack of words. It was a lack of stillness behind the words. He did not need a better speech. He needed a stronger relationship with silence, tension, and being temporarily misunderstood. Because the people who are never ignored are not always the loudest. They are the ones who do not panic when attention leaves them for a moment. They do not chase the room. They make the room feel what it means when they stop offering themselves cheaply. And that realization made Nathan uncomfortable because it meant the next move was not about changing Grant. It was about changing the version of himself that kept disappearing to make other people comfortable. Nathan's deepest mistake was not that he wanted to be seen. Everyone wants to be seen. The mistake was that he became too quick to prove he deserved it. The second Grant looked away, Nathan felt the urge to earn the room back. The second someone interrupted him, he rushed to make his next sentence more polished, more useful, more acceptable. He thought speed would save him. But speed often exposes fear. People can hear it in the breath before your words. They can see it in the way your eyes search for permission after you speak. They can feel it when your point is no longer a point, but an audition. Nathan explained too much because silence felt like rejection. He became too available because absence felt like danger. He answered too quickly because delayed approval made him anxious. And without realizing it, he gave other people the map to his inner control panel. Grant did not need to know Nathan's history. He only needed to watch his reactions. A small pause, and Nathan filled it. A flat tone, and Nathan softened. A dismissive glance, and Nathan worked harder. That is how emotional control is lost in ordinary life. Watch you adjust. Nathan began to understand that he had been living like an open door. Anyone with a cold tone could enter. Anyone with a skeptical face could rearrange his confidence. Anyone who ignored him could make him perform harder. That was not kindness. That was self-abandonment disguised as social intelligence. The tension grew because Nathan could no longer pretend he was simply being polite. He was afraid. Afraid of being disliked. Afraid of being seen as difficult. Afraid that if he stopped explaining, people would misunderstand him and leave him there. But here is the darker truth. People who need you to constantly explain your worth are often not looking for clarity. They are looking for control. And every time Nathan gave more than the moment required, he did not become clearer. He became easier to read. Grant was not ignoring Nathan because Nathan had nothing to say. Grant was ignoring him because Nathan kept reacting like a man who could not tolerate being ignored. The hidden law is simple, but most people only learn it after they have been controlled by it. The person who controls their reaction controls their position. Nathan used to think position came from being chosen, included, or praised by the right people. Grant seemed to understand something different. In any room, people quietly measure who can stay steady when the temperature changes, who becomes nervous when ignored, who talks faster when questioned, who gives up their point when someone with more status looks bored. Grant was not evil. He was not planning Nathan's collapse. He was a sharp, socially trained man who had learned that attention is a form of leverage. If he gave it, people leaned in. If he removed it, certain people started working harder. Nathan had been one of those people. When Grant looked past him, Nathan became more eager. When Grant paused after his comment, Nathan added more explanation. When Grant challenged him in a flat voice, Nathan softened the edges of his own argument. And with each reaction, the room saw the same thing. Grant was setting the frame, and Nathan was adjusting inside it. This same law appears outside boardrooms. In a relationship, the person who stays calm during distance often controls the emotional rhythm. In a family argument, the person who does not immediately defend themselves often keeps the stronger position. In a group of friends, the one who can let an awkward silence pass without performing usually carries more weight than the one who laughs just to be accepted. This is not about pretending not to care. It is about not letting every emotional signal become a command. Grant's pressure was subtle because real social pressure usually is. A A slight delay before answering Nathan. A short, interesting, that gave nothing away. A glance toward another person as Nathan spoke. None of it was dramatic enough to call out without sounding insecure, but all of it tested whether Nathan could remain intact. That is what made it powerful. If Nathan reacted too strongly, he looked unstable. If he said nothing but collapsed internally, he lost himself anyway. The only way out was control from within. Nathan began to see that being ignored was not always the end of his position. Sometimes it was the test of whether he had won. Grant could create silence, but Nathan did not have to fill it. Grant could withhold approval, but Nathan did not have to chase it. Grant could act unimpressed, but Nathan did not have to turn his confidence into a public negotiation. The moment Nathan understood this, the room looked different. Every pause became information. Every cold look became data. Every interruption became a choice point. Would he return to himself, or would he hand Grant the steering wheel again? For the first time, Nathan realized that his presence did not need to expand through force. It needed to stop shrinking under pressure. And that is where real position begins. Not when everyone listens, but when you no longer disappear just because someone decides not to. Then the reversal came, and it did not feel empowering at first. It felt humiliating. Nathan realized the room had not learned to ignore him in one day. It had learned through repetition. Every time he let someone cut him off and never returned to his point, he taught them that his words could be stepped over. Every time he answered a cold, giving long explanations to people who only wanted leverage. When a boundary was needed, he made it clean. I cannot take that on. I want to finish this point. That does not work for me. No apology attached to his existence. No courtroom defense for having limits. He also learned to watch behavior instead of trusting polished words. Grant could say he respected open discussion, but Nathan watched how he responded when someone disagreed. Did he listen, or did he punish the person with distance? Did he value clarity, or only compliance? Patterns told the truth that words often dressed up. And through all of it, Nathan practiced holding frame. His frame was simple. I do not need to chase attention to have value. If someone ignored him, he did not become louder. If someone challenged him, he did not become smaller. If the room felt tense, he did not make himself responsible for everyone's comfort. This was not manipulation. It was self-defense. Nathan was not trying to control Grant's mind. He was learning how to stop Grant's pressure from controlling his own. That is the ethical line. Dark psychology becomes dangerous when it is used to confuse, punish, or dominate. But it becomes protection when it helps you recognize emotional hooks before you grab them. Silence, guilt, disapproval, delayed attention. These hooks only work when you react automatically. Nathan's power came from interrupting the pattern. He did not become cold. He became deliberate. And for the first time, his presence started to feel less like something offered for approval and more like something guarded by self-respect. Nathan did not tell anyone he was changing. He stopped making announcements to people who had only respected consequences. The shift began in small, almost invisible places. When someone interrupted him in a meeting, he did not smile it away. He waited, held his place, and calmly said, I want to finish that thought. When Grant gave him that familiar cold pause, Nathan did not rush to decorate the silence with more words. He let the pause sit there until it belonged to both of them, not just to Grant. People noticed. Not loudly, not immediately, but the room began adjusting around him. His co-workers stopped cutting across his sentences as easily. His friends noticed he no longer answered every message with instant warmth. His family noticed guilt did not move him as quickly. Nathan was not becoming rude. He was becoming less available to emotional pressure. That made him harder to read. Before, people could predict him, ignore him, and he would try harder. Doubt him, and he would explain. Pull away, and he would reach. Now there was space between the stimulus and the man. A quiet space. A dangerous space. The kind of space where self-respect lives. Grant felt it most during a project update, when he looked past Nathan and asked someone else to summarize Nathan's own point. The old Nathan would have swallowed it. The new Nathan looked at Grant and said, I can speak to my own recommendation. Then he did. Slowly, clearly, without asking the room to rescue him. That was the moment the energy changed. Not because Nathan dominated anyone, but because he stopped disappearing on command. And once a person stops disappearing, people have to recalculate them. Silence became Nathan's shield. Mild, that was what made them effective. They gave Grant room to deny the attack, while still making everyone feel it. A few people glanced at Nathan. Someone looked down at the table. The old Nathan would have smiled too quickly and started explaining every detail again, trying to prove he was careful, reasonable, safe. But this time, he did not move. He let Grant's comment hang in the air without picking it up. Then he looked at the document in front of him and said, "The risk is addressed in Section 3. The recommendation stands." Nothing more. No defense of his character. No nervous softness. No extra words offered as payment for approval. The room felt the difference immediately. Grant had created pressure, but Nathan had not converted it into self-doubt. That was the shift. Grant waited, expecting Nathan to continue, expecting the old pattern to finish itself. But Nathan stayed quiet. The silence that used to belong to Grant now belonged to Nathan. And when a silence changes owners, the whole room feels it. Grant's expression barely changed, but his timing did. He took a second longer before speaking. He looked back at the document instead of through Nathan. It was subtle, realistic, almost invisible to anyone who did not understand the game. But Nathan understood. Power had not moved because he won an argument. Power had moved because he refused to react like a man asking permission to remain in the conversation. Later, in the hallway, Grant tried a colder approach. "You have gotten very serious lately," he said, as if seriousness were something Nathan needed to explain. Nathan recognized the trap. "Defend yourself. Prove you are still easy. Reassure me that I can still make you uncomfortable." He gave Grant a calm look and said, "I have gotten more direct." Then he kept walking. Not dramatically, not disrespectfully, just without offering his inner world for inspection. That was new, and that was why it worked. People who are used to controlling you through tone become unsettled when tone stops being enough. They may not show it. They may call you different, cold, difficult, arrogant, too serious. But often what they really mean is, you are no longer responding to the old signal. Nathan was not trying to defeat Grant. He was ending his own participation in the pattern. That is the moment power changes hands in real life. Not with a speech, not with revenge, but with one controlled response where the version of you they knew how to move simply does not appear. Nathan was no longer trying to become someone else. He was finally stopping the habit of abandoning himself. That was the real identity shift. At first, it looked small from the outside. He spoke a little slower. He paused before answering. He stopped laughing when something was not funny. He stopped filling every silence like it was his responsibility to make the room comfortable. But inside, something much deeper was changing. Nathan had spent years treating attention like proof of existence. If people listened, he felt real. If they ignored him, he felt smaller. If Grant approved, his confidence rose. If Grant looked away, his mind started searching for what he had done wrong. That was not self-awareness. That was dependence. Now, Nathan was learning to hold his value without handing it to the nearest reaction. He still noticed the room. He still felt pressure. He still understood when someone tried to test him. But he no longer let those signals become instructions. A cold look was just a cold look. A pause was just a pause. A dismissive tone was information, not a verdict. This is where a person becomes difficult to ignore in the deepest way. Not because they demand attention, but because they stop needing it to feel whole. Grant could feel it. So could everyone else. Nathan's presence had changed from anxious availability into quiet weight. He did not chase the room anymore. He occupied it. And when someone no longer asks permission to have value, people begin to sense a line they should not casually cross. Nathan had not become louder. He had become rooted. He was no longer the man waiting to be chosen, included, validated, or rescued from discomfort. He was the man who could stand inside discomfort and remain himself. That is the kind of power people notice before they understand it. Because the world does not only respond to what you say, it responds to what you no longer betray. And when you stop reacting like someone who needs approval, the world starts treating you like someone who has value. This is not only Nathan's lesson. It is the pattern hiding inside your own life. At work, people may hear your ideas, but they watch your boundaries. They notice whether you let interruptions pass. They notice whether you accept extra work just to avoid seeming difficult. They notice whether one skeptical look can make you explain yourself until your confidence sounds like an apology. In love, people do not only test your words. They test your access. They test whether distance makes you chase, whether inconsistency makes you overgive, whether silence makes you forget your own standards. In family, they test the oldest version of you. The version that still feels guilty for saying no. The version that still wants approval from people who may never give it cleanly. Among friends, they test whether jokes at your expense are still allowed, whether your time can be taken casually, whether your kindness has no edge. This does not mean everyone is evil. It means people learn from what you repeatedly permit. If you reward disrespect with more effort, disrespect learns where to return. If you reward coldness with pursuit, coldness becomes a tool. If you reward pressure with self-abandonment, pressure becomes the door into your mind. The solution is not to become hard. It is to become clear. Your boundary is the silent language that tells people how close they can come, how much they can take, and what part of you is no longer available for negotiation. Dark psychology becomes dangerous when it stops being a mirror and becomes a weapon. Nathan had to understand that line clearly, because once you learn how people respond to silence, pressure, approval, guilt, and distance, your ego may try to turn protection into control. That is where many people lose themselves. They escape being ignored only to become the kind of person who makes others feel small. That is not power. That is fear wearing a darker mask. Real power does not need to confuse people. It does not need to punish them with silence, make them chase warmth, or keep them anxious just to feel important. Toxic control says, I will make you unstable so I can feel strong. True power says, I will remain stable even when you try to make me weak. Nathan was not learning these rules to dominate Grant. He was learning them so Grant could no longer dominate the private space inside him. That difference matters. Silence is not for making someone suffer. It is for keeping yourself from reacting before you choose. Boundaries are not for humiliating people. They are for protecting the part of you that used to be too easy to access. Emotional control is not the art of becoming cold. It is the discipline of not letting every mood, comment, or rejection take command of your identity. The goal is not to become unreadable so people fear you. The goal is to become unreadable enough that careless people cannot use your wounds as handles. Because once you stop being a target for guilt, approval, and emotional pressure, you are no longer the easiest person in the room to move. And that is not manipulation. That is freedom. Nathan became unreadable in the way truly controlled people become unreadable. Not because he had no emotions, but because he stopped handing them to anyone who applied pressure. He still felt the old signals. He noticed Grant's cold pauses. He heard the slight edge in certain comments. He felt the familiar pull to explain, soften, prove, and repair. But now there was a locked door between the feeling and the reaction. People could knock. They could test. They could wait. But they no longer entered automatically. Nathan spoke less, and his words carried more weight. He observed more, and people revealed more than they intended. He stopped rushing to show his pain, his frustration, his need to be understood. Not every emotion deserved an audience. Not every wound needed to become evidence. Not every silence needed to be filled with the truth of his inner world. Grant still watched him, but now Nathan's calm did not ask to be believed. It simply stood there, quiet, complete, difficult to move. And that was the difference between being ignored and being impossible to dismiss. Nathan no longer begged for respect with volume, effort, or explanation. He carried it in his stillness. He became the kind of person whose silence made others think twice, because they could no longer tell whether he was hurt, angry, amused, or simply finished. That is the power of an unreadable mind, not hiding who you are, but refusing to let every room decide what you become. By the end, Nathan no longer needed Grant to notice him. That was the final freedom. Grant could still pause, look away, test the room, or measure people with that cold corporate calm, but Nathan no longer treated those signals as commands. He had learned that being ignored is not always proof that you lack value. Sometimes it is a test of whether you will abandon your value just to be seen. The old Nathan chased attention because he feared disappearing. The new Nathan understood that presence is not created by begging the room to look at you. It is created by refusing to shrink when the room looks away. He did not become loud. He became grounded. He did not become cruel. He became clear. And that clarity changed everything. People could still misunderstand him, but they could no longer easily move him. They could still test his silence, but they could no longer own it. They could still withhold approval, but they could no longer use it as a leash. That is the hidden rule beneath every room. every relationship, every social game. People may test your words, but they learn your power from what you stop allowing. When you stop explaining your worth, your presence gets heavier. When you stop chasing attention, your silence becomes stronger. When you stop reacting to every slight, you become harder to place beneath someone else's frame. Nathan walked out of that office without applause, without revenge, without needing a final victory over Grant. He had something better. He had himself back. And once you have that, you no longer need to be the loudest person in the room to be impossible to ignore. You become the person who can stand in pressure and not disappear. The person who can be misunderstood and not collapse. The person who can remain calm when others expect you to perform for their approval. That is when your identity changes. You are no longer waiting to be chosen. You are no longer auditioning for respect. You are no longer letting silence, coldness, guilt, or dismissal decide who you become. You see the pattern. You see the pressure. You see the hidden rules people use without even naming them. And when you finally see the game, you are no longer the pawn.